Hello again. This is the third time you are seeing me here, so if you are getting sick of me, I'm sorry, but I can't do anything about it. So this is a really interesting talk because I really love TypeScript. If you haven't figured it out from the way I have been talking about it a few times already, I really love TypeScript. And one of the most important features that I really love in TypeScript are generic types. And it is also one of the moments when TypeScript starts to get scary, right? When you are learning TypeScript first time, it's all good, it's all easy, this is a number, this is a string, and then suddenly someone shows you something really scary like this. Like, what's these angled brackets? What's this thing supposed to do? And this is when TypeScript gets really scary, in my opinion, because this, while is simple, you can learn it really easy with a video or some simple explanation, but it is the start of a lot of things. It is the start of you learning how to create map types. It's the start of how to create conditional types, and maybe even recursive types. And if someone here have dealt with recursive types, it's like a different language. But anyways, we will keep things here short and simple. So I'm going to quickly explain what generics are. So let's say you have a function like this. It's called the last item. It gets you the last item of an array. It may not be very helpful function because, I mean, you can use @-1, or there's many ways to do it. But just for the sake of example, this is the function we have. The thing about generics is it allows you to dynamically program against a type that you don't know yet. So what does this mean? So here, this function isn't concrete against an array of numbers. It's not implemented concretely against an array of strings. It's not implemented concretely against an array of objects. So if you give it an array of numbers, it will return a number. If you give it an array of strings, it will give you a string. If you give it a mixed type, it will infer the type and return it for you. And this is how generics work. It allows you to program against something that you will find out later when you actually use it. So right now, when we are implementing last item, we have no idea what the thing is going to be. It's going to be a thing. And we're going to find out about it later when we actually use it. So you probably have already seen generics already if you haven't never written one, but you are already using it even if you are just using JavaScript. So with Vue.js, the composition API, we have the ref function, right? And this is a similar function that takes a value, wraps it in an object, and returns it for you in a value property. So this is the same thing. This is how generics are implemented. This is how they can become useful. So just like refs. And the really interesting thing about generics is you can apply constraints to them. So you can say, I am only interested in a thing that is only a primitive. And here we type primitive as a number, a string, or a Boolean. It depends on your use case, just the type I wrote here. So here you are saying we are only wrapping numbers, strings, and Booleans, but we don't accept anything else. And at the same time, you don't know which one you are getting until you actually use it. So when you wrap it with like number 1, you get a number. When you wrap it with a string, it doesn't error out, and you get a string. When you wrap it with false Boolean, you get a Boolean. And same thing for everything. But if we try to wrap it with an array, it errors out because you have constrained it. So in Vue.js, constraint types have been really iffy because generic types have been really iffy because it's a long history of me attempting to get it to work. So back in 2021, I wrote an article on how to get it to work in a really hacky manner. I wouldn't recommend you read that article now, but if you are interested how things used to be, this is a good way to start. Then I figured out a slightly better way to do it in a year after almost, and it was slightly better, but it's not also great. Then finally, generic types was officially introduced in Vue 3.3. And we are now at 3.5, right? And I still don't see any generics. Nobody ships them for some reason in components. Some people do, but it's very rare to see them. And, oh, too early. So I'm going to show you in the live code, because today's almost every talk had a live code, so I have to do that as well. I'm going to show you how we can take a component that we already have and has a lot of issues and how we can fix it with generics. So If you are a little sleepy, please start focusing, because this is TypeScript, so it's going to get a little confusing. So right here, we have a component that is a select component, just a simple select, nothing fancy. We can make selections. We aren't going to change anything about the logic of this component. We only care about the types of these components. Because if we go here in the code, notice that we have a lot of errors, right? And you know, TypeScript is really demoralizing when you start seeing errors that's really huge. Like if I stand over here, wow, I don't want to read that, right? But unfortunately, you have to. So let's go to the input select and figure out the reason. So the main reason is we have an options prop that accepts an array of objects typed as an option type, which only accepts ID and label. Would you agree that this limits the reusability of this component? Right? You can only pass an array of objects that look like this. You can't pass your own things. You can't pass an array of strings, right? So this limits how you can use this effectively. So if we go here, we have an array of speakers, which is just a full name. If I go to the JSON, it's a full name, it's a photo. Tags is just an array of strings. Country is just an array of country and a flag. And every data structure is different. So what you end up doing is you map them, right? You map them until they match whatever the component is expecting. But it should be the other way around. And generic types allow you to do that. So there is many ways you can fix this. One way you can fix it is you can do this, but that's not fun, right? So let's go the hard route, but it will pay off. First, we remove this entirely. And now we can start typing a generic type here. So you start by defining an attribute on the script tag called generic. And then you type in what would you typically write in a generic expression. Let's start with, you can type an option, and it should be fine. But there is a small convention here that I like to follow, is to call it T-option. And this convention comes from C++, because they had templates that work similarly to this. So it's a convention so that later in the code you recognize this is a generic type, this is not something I imported in. So let's start by defining this as an array of T-options and our model as a T-option. We get a couple of errors here, but let's ignore that for a second. And let's go to our app, which surprisingly doesn't complain anymore. Like we used to have a lot of errors. Now we don't have errors at all. And if I stand here, it can actually infer the type of this. So full name is a string, and photo is also a string. If I try to access something that doesn't exist, like a name, it complains. So it actually can tell the type of options that you just passed in. I'm going to try something I haven't tried, which is pass an array of numbers to the options. And suddenly it's complaining because the option now is typed as a number. So it figures out the type of the option that you are passing, and it feeds it back to you through slots or events or however you want to use it. In our select component, we have a slot down here that's called option, and it just passes the option to you. And this is a common pattern if you are building a table, if you are building a select input, if you are building something that is meant to represent an array of things. So this is a very common thing to do that. But with generic, and you can't type it except with generic types. So we can do all sorts of things here. So let's try to fix first the key issue and the label issue. Because we want our component to be generic, we can't rely on having these two here, because it's unclear. It doesn't know how to fetch them. So libraries would do something similar to this. It would let you tell it how it can extract the key and how it can extract the label. So you can do that with maybe define an option key property, and that would be a key of the option. And then you can do the same thing, an option label, and that should be a key of T-option. However, this won't work because T-option can be anything, right? It's not necessarily an object, so we can constrain it. So we can apply a constraint in the same way. So we say extends, let's say a record of string and any. And here, any is fine, because you aren't actually using any as a type. You are using any to say, I don't care what the value is. You figure it out. So when I save here, all the errors are gone, because it thinks that option.id exists, but it may not exist, actually. So we should fix that by saying option of option key, and this would be option of option label. If I go to the app now, it complains, of course, because we need to pass these new properties to the components. So let's do that. So let's start with option key. And this should be, it already suggests this for me. It says it can be either be a full name or a photo. So let's just say full name. And then we need to pass in an option label. And I think full name is fine as well. And we don't get any errors anymore. Down there, we still have the issue here because we map this to something that has an ID and a label. So let's do the same thing here. So option key, ID, option label is label. Same thing here. This is a contrary that we map to something else. Let's remove this entirely. Like, let's just have this. And then we can pass in an option key that can be, it already suggests what I'm going to write. So it's just solving itself at this point. So I can say it's a country, and the label can be, well, Copilot was wrong here. So we can use country as well. And it figures it out. So we now have an error here, because it doesn't have a label. So let's see what's available to me, and it's country and flag. So it figures everything out for you, and this increases the way your components or how you can reuse them. Now I don't have to build a single select or keep mapping them to match the data that the select expects. Now I can build whatever, pass whatever, and it should just work. And as you can see, it's still working. Because we didn't change anything. We're just working with types here. So I would like to show you more, but I think I'm over time here. So I think this is it for this lightning talk. And I'm going to say the takeaway here is use generic types whenever possible, because they are so great, and I use them everywhere in our components. Thank you.